So we need to calm down and think coolly about what's going on. And Democrats need to stop saying, how could you vote for Donald Trump? And start asking, why did you vote for Donald Trump? And figure out what it is that we missed, that we lost the presidency, we lost the Senate, we lost the House. We got to take a deep breath. We have to listen to the people. You talked about Bill Clinton earlier.
Right.
I love Bill Clinton.
He listened. He listened.
He talked to people, regular people. I remember when Trump first got elected. I took office when Trump first took office. And there was a big post-mortem. What happened? With 50 people in the room. And a union guy said, the Democrats used to show up at the bars. And they used to show up at the church picnics. We don't see them anymore. We don't talk to the people. We've got to talk to the people and listen to the people.
Right.
What are the people saying? In my district, Trump won by 19,000 votes. I managed to reverse that and win by 10,000 votes. My voters are talking about the border. They want us to secure the border. They don't want us to, I'm a first-generation American. My father was born in Italy. I'm very supportive of immigration, but the people want us to secure the border. People are concerned about public safety, especially here in New York State. We have to listen to what the voters are saying. And as David said, when talking about the middle class, let's remember, the minimum wage in 22 states in America is $7.25 an hour. If you make $10 an hour and you work 40 hours a week and you work 50 weeks a year with 2 weeks vacation, you're making 20 grand a year. $15 an hour, you're making 30 grand a year. You're going to buy a house, you're going to educate your kids, you're going to pay for health insurance, you're going to retire without being scared. Whether you're a left-wing progressive or a right-wing conservative, everybody in America should believe that in return for working hard, I make enough money so I have a decent life.
You make a living wage. And you know what? I'm so glad you talked about whether you're a left-wing Democrat or a right-wing Republican. That reminded me, we had somebody on the show earlier this week going after AOC. We can't be the party of AOC. And I said, well, wait a second. AOC saying what you're saying, which is she's asking people in her district, okay, I would love to know, and it's not accusatory, why did you vote for Donald Trump and vote for me? Because that doesn't make sense in the political sphere. Why did you? And that's the question. So why don't you answer that question? Why did people vote for Donald Trump and vote for you?
It's different for different people, okay? If you're a building trade union guy, you're a carpenter, you're an electrician, you're a steam fitter, you're economically doing okay in my district. You're doing well. It's not the economy per se, but you don't like these culture wars. You don't like the identity politics. You don't like not supporting law enforcement. You don't like the border not being secure. If you're a person who's not doing well economically, you're concerned about that same cultural identity politics stuff, but you're also concerned about the fact that I can't get by in my family and I can't afford groceries. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. We need to listen to the people and respond to the people. My voters are not on social media. They're on Social Security.
Exactly. Okay, hold on. I want to borrow that line. Hold on one second. No, that's a good one. Have you trademarked that one?
No, that's not mine.
Okay.
That's a district for you, Joe. You could drop.
That is great. But it's so fascinating what you say about different voters, and especially working class voters caring about these social issues that Democrats don't think they care about. Because, and again, it depends who it is, because for so many people, we were talking about democracy. We were talking about authoritarian. Let me just say me. That's what I was talking about. That's what concerned me. What concerned Mika was reproductive rights. And we talked about that a lot. For millions of Americans, it was the price of gas and the price of groceries and public safety.
But public safety and the border.
And if you can't walk into a CVS store without the toothpaste being under lock and key, that may be a leading indicator that these crime stats that I talk about, that everybody talks about going down, it's not really hitting the voters where they live.
When I ran for my special election in February, I took the seat that George Santos was in. He's going to be proposed for a cabinet position any minute now. So I wanted to talk about the border because that's what people were telling me. The border. Every expert I talked to, every consultant, they said, don't talk about that. That's a Republican issue. I was like, that's not a Republican issue. That's an American issue. That's what the people are talking about. So I'm working on bipartisan solutions to secure the border, fix the broken asylum system, and treat people like human beings to address the problems we've had for such a long time. And I'm building a coalition of business, badges, and the Bible. Try and get people to work together in a coalition. As David was saying, where can we find these unlikely allies?
Yeah.
People don't want to see chaos related to mass deportations.
Right.
Businesses don't want it. Law enforcement doesn't want it.
Yeah, and so Lauren,
Yeah.
so let's take an issue that's very important to you, very important to Mika, very important to millions of Americans, and that's reproductive rights, which actually come down to Supreme Court justices for the most part. I think it's good for not just Democrats, everybody to understand that a lot of times people don't vote on that issue. So you take care of the issues that you hear about when you knock on doors, whether it's public safety, whether it's inflation or whatever. You get to influence these issues that matter the most to you, but not before you do what you hear about when you knock on doors. And that's not to say that there aren't so many people that care about reproductive rights. I'm saying, though, as we always say here, two things can be true at one time.
Right. And actually, two things were true in this election, right? You had all of these ballot initiatives that won in places where Trump also won, right?
Right.
Like, that's the reality of this election. There was a lot of zigzagging around the ballots for people in ways that I think none of us really anticipated. I mean, you look at Arizona, you look at any of these places. So where people had those opportunities to kind of do both, right? To vote to secure their freedoms, they did. They chose to do that. It was clearly very animating for a lot of women. But then there's this 1.5% margin that Trump wins by, and then all districts like yours, more significant. Also next door to him, Laura Gillard, who is the only woman in the state of New York who flipped a district. Very similar strategy. I mean, she did talk about the border in, Hempstead, right? Which is it was an issue important to her constituents. I wanted to just take issue with one thing from David before, though, because I feel like it matters. I wanted to come back to it, where he said, we need to explain to voters more about blah, 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 blah. No. This is the problem, is that we keep trying to explain to voters and tell them why they're wrong about things, right? They didn't understand that the economy was actually better than it is. Well, that's not a thing you can explain. You either feel it or you don't, right? So I think this is part of it. We need to diversify in a serious way our political consultant class outside of all my friends from the cities. We do need people from around the country. And last thing, my friend Adam Frisch was saying to me yesterday, he's campaigning in Colorado, the dignity, which is, I think, really what you're talking about in terms of wages and, the sort of quality of life. People want to be treated with dignity. And I think that is a baseline that we have to figure out how to do better.
60% of Americans do not graduate from college.
Exactly.
And people that don't graduate from college can have great lives and great jobs and wonderful things. And we need to be supporting them and treating them with dignity and respect and the worth that they have.
Right.
In America, all men and women are created equal. That's what we're aspiring to all the time.
Yeah, you talk about, instead of explaining to voters, having voters explain to you. When I ran my campaign, and I knocked on, the first time, 10,000 doors. Mm-hmm. But I would tell you, after knocking on 6, 7, 8 doors, and this, Congressman, I never took a poll. I never spent a dime on polls. And they kept saying, you need to know what you vote. I go, I know what they think.
Yep.
I'm knocking on doors.
Yep.
They're telling me what they think. And when I hear the same thing over and over and over again, I don't have to explain to them what's important. They've explained to me what's important. And the second thing is, one of the best bits of campaign advice I ever got, I got from a guy who said, listen, here's the deal. Go into a room. Don't talk to people. Mm-hmm. Sit there and listen. And keep listening. And if you're really smart, take out a notepad and start writing down what they say. And when they walk away from you, they will say, that is such a smart, articulate young man.
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely.
It's like
Yeah, and I think one of the questions for Democrats is what to listen to, because if you think about the experience that we just went through, the last time there was a competitive Democratic presidential primary was the 2020 primary, and I think that now, looking back on it, whether you're someone who worked for Kamala Harris or someone who worked for anybody involved in the Democratic Party, you would say fairly that in that moment in 2019, that the online discussion, what was happening on Twitter and other social media platforms, was the loudest voices in the Democratic Party, and they were far to the left of where the center of the Democratic Party is, and
by
far
the
to the
way,
left of what you would have heard.
said that. By the way, we said that in real time in 2019. You and I on this show, we said they're listening to Twitter, and they're getting disconnected from where even the voters in the Democratic Party are.
And it was notable in that cycle that, that in the end, the person who won the Democratic primary was Joe Biden, who was the one person who wasn't really listening to that. Yeah. His campaign was not connected to that at all. And you would go down and talk to black voters in South Carolina in the primary. There's a reason why Joe Biden led in the South Carolina primary from pillar to post. Even after his collapse in Iowa and New Hampshire, he never really, except for like one poll, dropped below Bernie Sanders in South Carolina, because black voters in South Carolina were like, we really need to beat Donald Trump. And we're really focused on who is the most likely person to win against this guy. And they looked at Joe Biden and thought that was him. And this is the question I'm asking, though, is as we go forward, and this is not to get in some stupid fight with people on that platform or any other platform, but it is the case that it is unrepresentative, the conversation there, just as it's way more toxic and right-wing on those platforms. It's not that it doesn't represent where the mainstream of the Republican Party is. It's also way far to the left of where the Democratic Party is. If you go out and talk to not just the party in general election voters, but primary voters are even further to the right than the Twitter conversation. So who do Democrats listen to now? They didn't have anybody to listen to in 2024 because Biden was presumed to be the nominee. Then there isn't the infrastructure that got built up ahead of Obama and Clinton, the infrastructure particularly that got head up when Clinton came in 1992, where the DLC and other things have been having a 12-year conversation about how do we change the party? We've lost 3 consecutive presidential elections. That doesn't exist anymore. The DNC is weaker than it's ever been. Those institutional framework doesn't really exist. And the main place where you hear Democrats speaking en masse is an unrepresentative sample of Democrats, which is on social media. So how do Democrats figure out who to listen to and how to channel this conversation productively? Because everybody in the party has an opinion about what we need to do to fix the party. But that conversation could turn into a rabble and chaos if there's not some way to channel it.
Congressman, I'm curious if you could speak to, there are not that many Democrats elected at this point, right? Democrats failed to take back the House. There are not that many people in power. We are in a real crisis moment in American life, right? A self-proclaimed autocrat is about to take the reins of power. How are you going to protect us? How are you going to protect the American people?
When something crazy is proposed by Donald Trump, as he tried to in his first term, when he wanted to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, when he wanted to get rid of protection for DACA, for Dreamers, you got to resist. You got to fight. You got to go back. But at the same time, you have to say, okay, what can we work together on? Where can we find compromise to try and move things forward to make our country better? People don't want to hear that all we're going to do is resist all the time and fight all the time. The people want us to resist when necessary, but work together whenever possible.
And I've written about that, and I absolutely agree. If everything is a crisis, then nothing is a crisis, right? But you are going to be facing real crises. So how are you guys preparing, right? Because the House is very slim majority to Republicans, and you have real opportunity there. And Mike Johnson, in the last session of Congress, was unable to pass anything without Democratic support.
Can I add something? When you have congressmen and women, 3 or 4 even, because the margins are going to be so slow, that decide they want to run for governor of, let's say, the state of New York, for instance, our governor of other states, our senators, then suddenly that 3-vote margin, 4-vote margin becomes enough, and people will say to the leadership, you guys got to tune down the crazies and the backbenchers, and we're seeing that in the Senate. We're going to see that in the House as well.
I think it's an opportunity. It's a chance for us to move forward. When I first came back to Congress after my special election, there was a massive bill for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan that Johnson was not putting on the floor because Marjorie Taylor Greene was threatening she was going to kick him out if he dared put it on the floor. I was the first Democrat who came out and said, Mr. Speaker, if you put that on the floor, it'll pass overwhelmingly bipartisan, number one. And number two, if Marjorie Taylor Greene tries to kick you out, I'll vote to keep you as Speaker. And that's what ended up happening. And Democrats actually saved his. Now, I don't want him to be the Speaker now, but he's going to be.
But you guys are going to have to do a lot more of that.
We have to work together. I was the vice chair of the Problem Solvers Caucus, 25 Democrats, 25 Republicans. How do we get people to meet every week to try to find common ground? Where can we work together to get things done? I think the border's a big opportunity. I think there are a lot of Republicans and certainly all the Democrats who are terrified of the idea of mass deportations. It'll be bad for the country. It'll cause chaos. It'll be bad for business. It'll break up families. It's inhuman. But we can't say we're going to oppose deportation of criminals. So where can we work together to find some common ground?
Well, you've